Muchas gracias todos por venir. La curaduría de Jennifer Teets se rige por un interés en los híbridos estéticos, el potlatch conceptual y el renacimiento del futuro. Actualmente vive y trabaja en París y recientemente hizo la curaduría de la exhibición The Pump en el Royal College of Art de Londres. Margarida Mendes explora las intersecciones entre cibernética, ciencia, filosofía y cine experimental, enfocándose en la transformación del materialismo y su impacto en las estructuras sociales y de producción cultural. En el 2009 funda el espacio The Barbershop en Lisboa, desde donde promueve la investigación filosófica y artística. Actualmente es curador asistente de la 11ª Bienal de Guangzhou.
Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. So the topic we're exploring today is called inquiry as a form of practice. And I think that Margarida and I wanted to kind of discuss or begin with how we met each other. And that's in the context of a project called The World in Which We Occur. And essentially that initiated out of a mini-series that I curated for the Contemporary Art Center in Vilnius in Lithuania. And that series was called Pharmacokinetics of an Element, and that attempted to address different issues within or address the role of environmentalism and say in the arts, social sciences, and the humanities, and how to build sort of novel methods to address those issues, and to discuss, say, new materialisms, what else, climate change, social justice, and the role of the object, and sort of wastes and fluids implicated within the body. And so essentially the world in which we occur kind of emerged from there, which is something between, I'd say, an event and a performance and a listening session and an engagement with an audience, plus with a series of thinkers across thinkers and artists and scientists and philosophers across the world, and who are engaged in very critical issues around, say, the sciences and also the history of materiality or kind of world in flux. So maybe, Margarida, you want to speak about how the first world in which we occur actually was around thinking about climate change and political struggle, and the last iterations, which were more complex, there were 4. They consisted of...
We did 4 sessions last September on the Baltic Triennial, and these sessions... Did you explain the James Lee Byers part?
Yeah. True. That's true.
So the work is inspired in a work by James Lee Byers from 1969, the World Question Center, where Byers gathered a series of intellectuals and friends. Is my microphone okay? No, I think it's very high pitch. Sorry.
It's okay.
Okay. Actually, we will see an image that will go around with the format that Byers televised, with a circle of people that would call up intellectuals, artists over the phone live, and you could assist to this conversation on the telephone, and Byers would ask them what's the question on their head at the moment, what's pertinent to discuss, what's the concern that's on their mind. And we decided to explore this format further in the format of these listening sessions shared by everyone in an auditorium. Mm-hmm. So we picked up a series of topics, which in September were related with climate change and grief, the pharmacon, so ideas of history of materiality and the body, fluids, also molecular colonialism and microorganisms, how our relation with matter has been changing across time, and also legal systems and frontiers or borders and nature. So how we've been developing systems for mediating how we relate to the natural world. So for today, what we thought about doing is exploring this idea of the inquiry, the questioning further, and here on the stage propose a series of questions to each other, which we will try to answer mutually, and then you can also intervene afterwards and pose more questions.
So I guess I'm going to start with a question for you, Margarida.
No, this is a question for you.
I do. You addressed it to me? Oh, true. Good.
We prepared because we wanted to have it straight. So the first question is, what is the potential of inquiry in the worlds of the arts today?
Okay, the first, the way I can sort of directly engage with this question or thinking about the role of inquiry. So an inquiry being, say, like a scientific investigation or a question. This brings me to think of philosopher and sociologist Bruno Latour's an inquiry into modes of existence, and because there's a direct relationship with my own work, also with the thinking of Latour, and where he used kind of research protocols to account for the many modes of existence between fields of knowledge as wide as, say, law or science and politics and also the arts, no? It's a kind of a systematic way for building a new philosophical kind of anthropology. So thinking about inquiry as that kind of philosophical anthropology, what could it be if it were also kind of a art system or a kind of extended all the way even to the object, no? So it offers a kind of very different view. What Latour says is it offers a very different view of what the moderns may have been, and also kind of a very different basis for opening up a very different comparative anthropology. So thinking, but how do we extend that to the arts? And this brings me to think about how James Lee Byers also addresses the role of inquiry instead of, say, an assertiveness of response. So how can a question be more sort of effective than an answer or a response? And it's really interesting the kind of questions that were proposed or in his series. No, like even he reached out to Walter Hobbs, thinking, and Walter Hobbs talked about cognition. I mean, you have and this was happening in the late '60s. So I think that there's also kind of a very interesting, say, mirror of, say, what's going on in the '60s, say, what's going on also right now politically. That's what I was thinking more about the role of inquiry. How can that sort of, the building blocks of knowledge be also useful, say, in thinking also of the artistic system, no?
I think maybe that also relates with how we develop methodologies for working. For example, on my side, not being so satisfied with the exhibition format for the curatorial. So how, in trying to establish teams or finding partners to think with, we develop these new formats of conversation that maybe drive us through our maybe not yet completely defined project, and how hybrid this can be in joining many disciplines and sometimes provoking other forms of institutions to emerge and to question these borders of where are the politics of our action and the impacts of our activism in our practice. So I think inquiry relates to all this, to this transdisciplinary approach on the curatorial, which is very necessary in teams today, I think.
So I'm going to ask you, Margarida, taking the intention of James Lee Byers, beyond the World Question Center, what do you think is the pertinence of starting with the questions instead of, say, explanations?
I think I partly answered the methodology, but I don't know what to add further on this one. We've been looping.
A question? Yeah.
A question, okay. So what do you think about the crossover between the arts and sciences and the evolution of it throughout the years?
I think there's a greater leverage between the two, but there's definitely a tension that is also equally formed about, say, what is the validity, or not validity, but what do material assemblages offer for, my question is like, how can they be beyond sort of material assemblages and
can you
offer something,
that?
I was thinking about, even just to return back to Bruno Latour's recent project that was held in Paris, it was a preamble to the. It's a simulation, we can say, of the Paris climate talks. However, but it was a simulation where non-humans and other kind of beyond the nation state, other actors were introduced as political agents to play roles in a discussion for political process making. But that became a sort of a material assemblage, or a kind of an experiment in theater. But I do think that this can be very problematic if it stays within a material assemblage, which is just sort of a play with affect or something to that extent. But what happens, where is its potential for, say, something what is much more politically entwined or has a sort of engagement? We talked about this a little bit with our speakers in the first session, such as Roy Rowan, who is a geographer, and he writes he works with Hobbes, I think, right? And how he thinks about the implications of, say, the Anthropocene, and the necessity for political action, and the versus over just our kind of experimentation with, these questions in biennials and all of the efforts of the art world now. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that yourself.
I would add to that I think that this debate between the arts and the sciences, at least for me, in the past years, has been related with the way of how the agents and the institutions instrumentalize themselves in different relations. So how the circulation of the modes of artistic research or of scientific research overlap, and how they can become either kind of progressive and experimental or strictly representational. So I think there's been more friction on these sides. Also, of course, the digital boom and all this crazy exponential funding that has been for transdisciplinary projects that involve, data representation and analysis, and how like artists interact in the creation of these modes of visualization. But also how science has been craving for artists in residence in their foundations to justify some kind of, existential sublimation of their very mathematical reasoning. So I think there has been more friction in the past years, and somehow the debate on is artistic research valid just as a mode of another scientific kind of research. And this has been in discussion in many institutions in Europe, such as Haus der Kultur der Welt and even the science museums and so on. But it's still under development, I think, because the modes of funding are becoming ever more institutionalized, and sponsorship, as you know, is very targeted. So there's not always the freedom to be as radical or multi-discursive. Yeah, I don't know. That's what I had to add.
So we've been kind of hit over the head with the term the Anthropocene, and it's a word that has invaded the media lately and over the last, I'd say, two years. And what do you think that people gather from that? What do they understand from the Anthropocene, and how can it be? I mean, is it something that has a possibility for transformation? Where are we heading next, also with the Anthropocene?
I'm not a medium, so I can't talk so much about the future. But I can talk a little bit about the term, because I don't know if everybody here knows what the Anthropocene means. It's a term that it's been widely on the news since 5 years, but it's been in discussion since much earlier. And basically, there's a series of scientists that are gathering in an office trying to define if we are in a new geological epoch. So in a new period, such as the Jurassic, the Mesozoic, and so on, which would be a period where the man has altered so much the world and has touched upon all the matter, all the systems, and highly transformed reality. So nature would not be solely nature, but already a human nature, if I can say this. But it's also a term that has been in dispute, not only in terms of when to place the date on the calendar, when this moment could have started, but also throughout other people and other research centers if it's even valid. Why should it be the Anthropocene? Why is there an anthropos, a man? Why is there an era of the man? Is this assuming too much? So these conversations are happening not only in geographical societies, but also like in some art and cultural institutions ever more. If you see the programming this year internationally, almost all countries are holding conference panels, both in museums and universities on the topic. And yeah, it was on our first session, which was the pilot in 2014 for the world in which we occurred. This was something that we tried to debate with Etienne Turpin, Nabil Ahmed, and Rory Rowan, that have been related to questions such as flooding,
Lead poisoning, the bodily, also the idea. I mean, that also kind of takes us to where I think the next question is being about the bodily question. For me, I think that the Anthropocene has a greater potential in other kind of micro kind of scales. I'm really interested in the micro scales there, and I think that's what we did address in the sessions thereafter. And it's not so much about the there's this constant debate with the vocabulary that is a kind of, for me, a useless exercise in a way, rather than other kind of implications politically and how that can be mobilizing politically. Because if it as some of them discuss, if it doesn't have any kind of form of political mobilization, then it has no effect.
It's just like vocabulary.
Yeah.
Well, which is also an exercise that Haraway does, but in another trajectory, she calls it capitalocene instead of Anthropocene. So changing the concept to the capital, to the flux instead of the agents.
Exactly.
Which I think is way more interesting, how things connect and are mediated, instead of, man, again, himself. But maybe taking this idea of the bodily and going through your research on the pharmacon, which led to this cycle to appear and for us to meet each other. I would like to ask the next question, which is, can the bodily be emancipatory, and how? What is the potential of a bodily consciousness today?
I think one way this all began was through different methodologies. I was looking at, say, through materials as wide as mud, or the consumption of earth, or say how through these materials what is going on in terms of inner transformation and metamorphosis. Both that's a philosophical argument, and also kind of a worldly metamorphosis, thinking about the body and the earth as a unit. And we discussed that a bit with one of our speakers, Barbara Orlin, and she addressed the pharmacon as more in the sense of medical materiality, like what is medical materiality today, and is the role of material at large can it be sort of a kind of consciousness, or can it have weight in that sense? And we also looked at other kind of pharmacons, which are such as wide as lead poisoning happening in Bangladesh, as Nabil Ahmed spoke about, and the transformation of bodies there, and in that sense, also, or even Colombian artist and activist Carolina Caicedo's work with the rivers in Colombia, like looking at what is a form of slow violence, or what is necropolitics. So thinking about those issues within the body, that gives us a very clear portrait of what we are today as bodies. So that's something that I think has become increasingly important for me in thinking just about other kind of invisible or backstories of materials. But that's when I'm thinking about material, like those kind of materials for, say, for an exhibition or an event, or just a form of thought, or a creative action. No, so that's how the bodily came back to, I think, our series, but and also seeing those the connectivity between, say, contemporary art and larger kind of social issues, or also issues within health. No. So our relation with matter and the boundaries of visibility is always changing. We're permanently altering the earth. So what do you think about, Margarida, about GMOs today, and how are they seen? What's the...
So GMOs, genetically modified organisms, for those that don't follow. Maybe I would start this question by grabbing the micro scale that you were just describing, that Caicedo or Barbara were working with, and trying to think of a way of how I see a diagram, of how I see the world, and how I try to interpret it in my practice, which is ever more needed, which is including this idea of human and inhuman agents operating in the same ecology. So both things that we recognize as our bodies and things that are extension of our bodies, that are maybe programmed by us, are synthetic, are transformed, and are a continuous part of our ecology. And how evermore in this discourse of hybridity that Bruno Latour also addresses, they become so present in our daily lives, almost unrecognizable, but we cannot live without such extensions of us, and how they've altered also then our bodies are formed. So how it's a very dual relationship between these human and non-human things that transform us. And this was very interestingly portrayed in the work of Stefan Heilmarch, that we also interviewed in one of the sessions on molecular colonialism, where Stefan addresses the crescent propensity for the biological in terms of the discourse on many fields, on the approach of the micro scale of the organism, and how it's been imperative in how we, sometimes do art or engage with social dynamics, even like on our domestic side. Mm-hmm. So how the biological has become a lens, how this close-up. And also through the work of Fran Gallardo, a very interesting researcher based in London, who is doing experiments with tasting with his tongue. He does activism in the Thames estuary, which is a river very, very polluted in the UK. And he does many walks, and he also grows vegetables. And then he does sessions where he cooks those vegetables, and they're like tastings. So the idea of certain organisms populating our surroundings and affecting them, transforming them, but also like being ingested and shared in these communal moments, and which kind of sensibilities we can have through exploring, other tactile moments. But going through the GMOs, because we were talking a little bit about this on the past days, eating so much corn every day in Mexico, but also because of the Zika virus that is around. I've been reading a lot of news related to this, and feeling that we still need a lot of work to gain consciousness on how our everyday is affected by things transformed by, corporations, multinationals, but also things that we don't engage with, vetoing or protesting in terms of, but they populate, our circuits of distributions. And the GMOs is something that I think needs to be very much approached and deconstructed and brought to public debate, because it's completely modifies all the systems of distribution, power, and also consumption. So it's basically altering our bodies daily. And there's, going back to the Zika mosquito, there's been a recent article that actually connects the transformation of the virus with a genetically modified mosquito that was liberated in Brazil for a particular cause, which would be killing another mosquito that was causing the dengue fever. So they created this mosquito that would just live for a few days and would never procreate, would never exist for much longer. But of course, he mutated and 3% survived, and then he procreated with the other mosquito, and then it's already in our bodies, and it's completely out of reach. So I'm somehow very interested in the circularity of our actions and our agency in relation to this very minor,
kind of
I don't
micro.
know. I'm over talking.
No, not at all. I mean, that brings me to think also about who a wonderful thinker, philosopher and activist, ecofeminist Indian named Vandana Shiva. She's kind of a hero for anti-GMO protesters. She's, had a very large role in fighting against, say, the multinational corporations like Monsanto who receive funding from the World Bank, from the World Trade Organization, from the United States government, and even philanthropies like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and who all of these are who are corporations and entities that are looking to impose a kind of food totalitarianism on society. So she's been engaging in a very large struggle for a number of years, and the way she's looking at the role of seeding and seeding culture is something I think really interesting, and and also kind of thinking conceptually just about seeds. I think that's something I think that I think we'll even probably be getting to I can imagine in next sessions, and thinking about cross-fertilization, all kind of different things going on in that sense. So that, I don't know, from seeds to soils, no?
Yeah, maybe I jump to the next question. Yeah. So tell me about your research on soils in Latin America. What led you to start this research, and how did it develop?
So I haven't specifically worked on soils in Latin America per se. I've worked on a lot on the idea of inner transformation, metamorphoses, kind of the breeding of selves and bodies, but thinking about that through art. But how to think about that? This all began through a kind of a narrative I had encountered on what's called the anti-dori, which is a kind of a treatment or a way to handle poisoning through a trickle, it's called, from Greek antiquity. And essentially, I was interested in, because my own interest in mud and as a kind of conceptual kind of vehicle for transforming the body. This is something I had done with another exhibition called A Clock That Runs on Mud, which was also about time, or thinking about muddy time, and then some other things with mud in Lithuania. But I had been discussing with a group of artists in Belgium that run a space called Établissement d'en face. There's 7 artists, and they were interested in how I was like, they kind of imagined me putting mud all over myself or consuming earth. But it was really about thinking about these, a certain form of, a kind of performativity with these pills that were used in Greek antiquity, and also thinking of through this one representation and how it can be transformed to something, say, more personal, political, and how to define a space of meaning, like through this materiality, but as a form of kind of a politically and scientifically enmeshed form of thought, right? So these pills were essentially like clay cakes that were excavated through a ritual by a priestess. There was something very ritualistic about it. And they were laid to dry. And later they were exported throughout Europe and had a huge role in the expansion of the pharmaceutical, and were used to treat illnesses or different kind of forms of poisoning. But that became just sort of like this micro narrative for thinking through the exhibition, sort of almost like if it were a backstory. And in the exhibition there were, things as largely as thinking about the role of a transforming body, or the consumption of thread to represent kind of the generation. So it was like how can, say, the nature-cultural divides go into something larger and a larger discourse within contemporary art. So it's not just encapsulating something that is in the form of ecological crisis or contamination, but rather a larger macro narrative from that. Yeah, I guess that maybe thinking if it does have any Latin American connection, there was an exhibition that what we did do as a second step that happened at Florida in Bogota, and that actually also brought in terra preta, which is also used right now a lot in carbon sequestration as a form of, it's being debated as a kind of medium that could be used to aid in halting climate change, but it's very debatable because between the anthropologists and also people who are trying to exploit this form. But that was just one little element of this related to the soils. But I think the soils, if anything, they are just sort of a backstory that later led to a form of abstraction in the show. So,
but it's still under development. There will be.
Yes.
Tell me a bit.
It's still under development, and there's a third project that's coming up at Parallel in Oaxaca that I think we're also going to probably bring in this idea of seeding and earths, but related to certain practices in Oaxaca that we're beginning to research right now. That will happen this April or in the fall sometime. So, Margarida, when thinking about the arts or activism, and specifically kind of climate justice, where does representation fall in this sense for you? Or I don't know if you can answer that question, or if it's a...
I have to ask you what you mean with representation there.
Yeah. Maybe, I guess we're in the canon of going, climate justice falling back into even contemporary art, which we have seen it. It has happened.
Well, actually, there's a greater tendency of, I think, the last 5 years of not most, but many artists that I meet are very concerned with ideas not only of justice, but also of land and water. Of course, these questions are completely connected with property, the big challenge we have today of sovereignty and property, and how do we deal with our rights. So in the end, it's a question of human rights. But but climate justice is totally present in the arts today, and in how many people are operating, which I think needs a closer look in terms of also the curatorial discourse being built around it, and how institutions will include it and maybe fund it, and also how the attention of artists will be dedicated exactly to what is the arts and what is the politics in the work. So how the organizational strategies are thought as artists or as activists, and how this can overlap. So what I see many times is that the position is very blurred, because there's more this urgency of reacting than a strict strategy already defined in how to address such big, complex problem as climate change that still needs a lot of debate and a lot of proper media coverage.
I mean, essentially, it's an economic problem too.
Of course, it's a huge economical, political problem all over the world, on a macro scale, and touching everybody on a macro scale, all the levels. That's something that we've been concerned a lot in the session, for example, that we did on grief, where we were going through topics such as, animals and grief, how do we relate to other living entities, and how do they feel these huge transformations? Not only deforestation, depopulation, but how these all habitats change. But also, for example, in the north of Canada, in the bordering cities close to the ocean, how agriculture and all the life has been transformed. So this has been very present in the work of many people. mainly through these concerns of agriculture and water. I think it's the first level of climate change hit on the arts. But what I feel that it's very enriching is when we lend tools from our fields to other fields. For example, when there's been a big movement of programmers reaching activists, because activists sometimes don't have tools to present their graphics, so they can't back out their discourse. Or some people don't have a sensibility for developing a workshop or a context for talking to different ages or different communities of how to build this consciousness, how to raise consciousness together. So I think in terms of the arts, something that for sure we can contribute with is not only visibility, because yes, we are mediatic, we hit many numbers, we have a wide public, but also informing new sensibilities of nature, of relating to other non-human agents, and how to develop a strong capacity of interpreting abstraction. Yeah. Not only creating abstraction, but interpreting it. Well, I could go on and on. But I don't know if you want to add something. But maybe we can go through writing, and I would ask you how your practice as a writer involves current issues of the natural sciences being explored not only in laboratories, but debated throughout the media.
I mean, thinking about abstraction, I guess I could take this back to abstraction, actually, because if anything, I think that the way the natural sciences play a role for me is that they filter into something what I call fictocritique. And fictocritique is something, it's the way I kind of engage the natural sciences, and it's something between life writing, authorial kind of pursuit of the author, and also kind of self-discovery in experimentation through writing. So take a scientific subject and then condition it under those three forms, and then also have a kind of theoretical frame around that. And I think of it a lot as a way to produce or write performatively, as Judith Butler talks about. She talks a lot about how can the performative be through something like writing, or through other ways of being, you know. And so that's something I try to explore in writing, and to also grasp, say, the paradoxical traits of the scientific, and have them play off of each other. And what happens then, what is illustrated, or what kind of quandary or conundrum is set up. And I think that's where then the speculative then really comes forth as something productive. And it also considers what we are in our kind of reality that is a sort of world in flux. And I think that's when we talk about, say, a world in flux in the world in which we occur, is about this constantly kind of agitated world, no? And that's something I think that it comes a lot across in the writing that I do, is this sort of agitated world. And it's very visceral, very colorful, and also very violent. So yeah, I don't know what that can offer. I don't know in terms of laboratories, but yeah, I think that's where the playfulness and the productive come together in writing, say.
I would add that we actually just completed like 2 short stories that we did separately for a book being published soon by Marnie Slater. Mm-hmm. And actually I really enjoyed the very tight deadline, because I wanted to write a short story on climate change, but I had no idea how. And something that gave me a lot of freedom was the potentiality that writing has of jumping temporalities and spaces. So even though we had a particular year where the story had to happen, we managed to somehow go around it and create fictions. And I decided to take this format. I don't know if you've seen the video Powers of 10 of Charles and Ray Eames, which is a zoom in space from micro to macro. And I decided to apply the same strategy, both in space and in time, in 4 pages. So it's like a very fast time travel through this matter in flux, this vivid world, which maybe in your story is through colors, the different snows. Yeah. But I think this ability of shape-shifting that writers and artists have is so strong to potentiating new ways of seeing the world and new ways of conceiving, relations and politics. And, sometimes, just a very simple invitation to write a story can just transform so much how we potentiate these relations. I don't know.
So, Margarida, you run a series of collective activities in Lisbon, such as a reading group, and also your curatorial project called the Barbershop. And can you explain the role of walking, reading, or philosophical exercises that you carry out? Also, the summer school that you have. And what do you think that offers, say, for your own consideration of collective action, or how has that come across? And maybe you can give a few examples.
It's hard to summarize the Barbershop because it exists since 2009, but I can say that when it started more from the wish of a space for encounter and for exchange than a space just for objects and closed narratives. So I proposed people to do like one-night projects or one afternoon, one meeting. And this could be like from a marathon of performances to an ephemeral installation. And the topics changed a lot, but sometimes they have streams that go very much along cybernetics and information theory, or these materialisms and how we relate to material dynamics and the world consumption, but also the rights of artists and labor. They take many forms. There's a book club every 2 weeks. We read both essays and fiction together. So always something more brainy and always an image to captivate you and allow you interpretations and freedom. There was a cycle that I did on psychedelia for 2 weeks, which was a beach bar book club with the barbershop full of sand, and we project films. We had listening sessions, which is a format that I love, and listen together to several pieces of composers. And people could come along and read and hang out. So the idea of spending time, allowing other temporalities is really precious. That's why summer school always includes walks. After we did a talk, actually departing from this image of the mind of Chuquicamata and exploitation of resources in Latin America that Godofredo Pereira is writing about. We went to a big walk in a forest in Monsanto to decompress the territory and walk to a forbidden area of an abandoned restaurant, which is the highest topographical point of Lisbon that nobody can access, is closed. So walking and reading and eating together and everything is a part of the same metabolism for ideas.
I guess we're just down to our, I guess it's a mutual question for both of us, is what we think is urgent right now. And
maybe you want to answer that?
You can, I think female networks are urgent. I'm also very interested right now in morphing territories and the question of the nation state and morphing territories, like especially me living, or both of us living in Europe, with the uprise of, like, how can there be more of a morphing territory than the uprise, say, of the singularity of the nation state? And the United States elections are also very much on my mind.
I'm also very interested in new forms of law. We've been talking about it a bit, like transnational law. So how things are mediated beyond the nation state, like you say. So how different communities are developing systems of legalizing and mediating the world, but how difficult that is with the power structures we have. But still, that there are some great activists, lawyers working on that. So but also like microorganisms again. After our conversation with Jenna Sutella and Stefan Elmreich, I'm pretty much on the very, very micro level and the very macro level of things. So how these different cartographies are influencing our daily routines and our actions. But maybe it's time that you have some questions for us, because we've been asking a lot of questions to each other until now.
¿Hay preguntas? ¿Tienen? ¿No?
En español, en portugués,
Si quieren en español, en portugués,
italiano.
sí.
Hi.
Hi.
It's a question for Margarida. It's about the name of the project, the barbershop. I was curious to know why you choose that name.
Because it used to be a barbershop.
Oh,
So it's very simple. It used to be a barberia.
yes.
And it was empty for many years. So somebody just lent it to me. So it had mirrors, it had the wooden walls. It was small.
Okay, that's why this was the
Yeah.
reason. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? No?
Comments?
Okay. We call it an evening? Wrap? Yeah?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.